I'm Camille, 30, and last week I got a call from my dad, crying. The first time in my life I'd ever heard him cry. 2 years ago I had called my parents in tears after he was diagnosed with stage 3 cancer, and all he said then still haunts me. 6 months of chemotherapy, 36 hospital trips, and not a single visit from my family. They were too busy with my brother's wedding. Now he needed me and my answer was 4 simple words. I'm here, Dad. Before I dive deeper, if this story resonates with you, take a moment to like and subscribe, and leave a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. But let me take you back to that day 2 years ago when my world shifted. I was a senior graphic designer at a mid-sized agency in Boston, the kind of place with exposed brick walls, way too many plants, and a fancy espresso machine that cost more than my first car. I loved my job. I had worked my way up from intern to senior designer in 5 years, all on my own. My apartment was a small one-bedroom in Somerville. Modest, but it was mine. And my Monstera plant on the windowsill had survived 3 years, which felt like an accomplishment. I had my routines. Coffee at 6:30, gym 3 times a week, and Thursday dinners with my friend Harper. That Wednesday began like any other, buried in a major campaign for a fintech client, deadlines making my eye twitch. My laptop was open, Slack pinging every 30 seconds, when my phone rang from a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it, lost in work, but something nudged me to answer. Miss Atwood, this is Dr. Patterson's office. We have your biopsy results. I remember my coffee had gone lukewarm, the sunlight cutting across the conference room glass, and thinking that biopsy results shouldn't come with this tone. The results are back, the nurse continued. Dr. Patterson wants to see you first thing tomorrow morning. Can you be here at 8 a.m.? The nurse asked. My Starbucks sat untouched the rest of the day and dinner tasted like nothing. I kept thinking they don't call you in for good news. The next morning, Dr. Patterson didn't waste a second. Stage 3 breast cancer, aggressive tumor, treatment needed immediately. Sitting in that cold, tidy office with diplomas on the wall and a fake peace lily on the table, I felt like my body wasn't mine, like I was watching myself from above. I was just a young woman in her 20s wearing my work blazer, hearing words meant for someone else. Miss Atwood, Camille? I blinked. Yes, I'm here. Do you have someone who can drive you home? Harper was working her hospital shift, my coworkers were acquaintances, and without thinking I said, I'll call my dad. That's how my family worked. My father, Richard Atwood, was quiet, firm, immovable. You didn't argue or question him, you just followed. Despite feeling overlooked most of my life, I reached for him because that's what daughters do when everything falls apart. I stepped out, found a hallway bench, and fumbled with my phone so badly it took 3 tries to dial. He answered on the second ring. Camille, what is it? I'm in the middle of something. I hesitated, then started to explain. Our family had a clear hierarchy. My brother Derek, 2 years younger, was the golden child. He got a full ride to Boston College, no questions asked. I got told girls didn't need expensive degrees and ended up with $87,000 in student loans. When Derek landed his first job, Dad threw a celebration. When I earned a promotion to senior designer, my mom sent a single thumbs-up emoji. That was our world, and now, in that moment, I had to call the man who had always made the rules, hoping he'd be there for me. Derek had just announced his engagement to Megan, a nice enough woman with polished hair and a quiet office job, and from that moment on, my family disappeared into wedding mode. The ceremony was set for October, only 4 months away, and it became the center of every conversation and every meal. My mom lived on Pinterest, collecting ideas nonstop, while Dad talked budgets and venues like nothing else mattered. Sitting in that hospital hallway, I finally said into the phone, my voice shaking, Dad, I just left the doctor. I'm really sick. I waited, listening to his breathing, hearing my mom ask in the background who was calling. I repeated myself, slower this time, explaining the diagnosis and that treatment needed to start right away, admitting how scared I was. Tears ran down my face as nurses passed by, pretending not to notice. I waited for him to say something comforting, something simple, anything that sounded like support. Instead, there was a long pause, and then he said they couldn't deal with this right now. He reminded me that my brother's wedding was coming up and there was too much going on. He told me I was strong, independent, and that I'd handle it like I always did. His voice turned firm, signaling the end of the call, and he said he had to go because Derek and Megan were coming over to discuss wedding details. The call ended just like that. I stayed on that bench for nearly an hour watching life move around me while mine quietly broke in half. I wanted to call back to beg to explain how serious this was, but I didn't. Instead, I saved the call record, noting the time and length, and placed it in a folder I labeled family, not knowing then how often I'd look back at it later. That call to my father ended up being the last time I reached out to him for 2 years. On my first day of chemotherapy, I drove myself to the hospital, walking into the infusion center on the 4th floor. A room full of reclining chairs set in a semicircle, each within 4 stand and a small TV on an adjustable arm. It felt like a medical version of a spa, sterile but strangely inviting. I checked in, signed the paperwork, and was assigned chair 7. The nurse, Rita, kind and patient with her reading glasses on a beaded chain, hooked me up to the 4. "First time?" she asked. I nodded. It's normal to be nervous. Most people bring someone. I looked around. Chair 3 had a woman with her husband holding her hand, whispering to keep her calm. Chair 5 had a teen whose mother read Harry Potter aloud, and Chair 9 had an older man with soup in a thermos from his daughter. Chair 7 had only me. I texted my mom, "Starting chemo today. I'm scared." 6 hours later, she replied from the florist with Megan debating centerpieces. "Hang in there, sweetie. Peonies or roses?" I stared at the message, screenshot it, added it to the family folder, and typed back, "Roses are nice." I didn't tell her about the nausea, the vision blurring, or pulling over twice on the drive home. I didn't see the point. It wasn't until my 3rd session that I met Harper Sullivan, a nurse practitioner running a support group for patients. She had curly red hair pulled into a practical ponytail and eyes that seemed to see everything. "You're always alone," she said, sitting in the empty chair beside me. I noticed the way she looked at me, warm, not pitying. I smiled, but it wasn't easy. I asked quietly, "Why are you always alone?" This time I didn't brush Harper off like I normally would have. I should have said something polite and moved on, the way I'd learned to handle people I didn't want to talk to. But after 3 rounds of chemo, with my hair thinning and weeks without a real conversation, honesty felt easier. "My family is busy," I admitted. She didn't react much, but I caught a flicker in her eyes. Maybe recognition, maybe frustration for me. "When's the wedding?" she asked. "October," I said. "And your last chemo session?" "November." She nodded slowly. "We keep visitor logs here. Every patient, every visitor, every day. People sometimes request them for their records or memories." I didn't understand why she said it then, but I remembered. 3 days later, I requested my first copy. Derek's wedding was set for October 15th. I was between chemo cycles, in that brief window where nausea faded but fatigue lingered. I hadn't planned to go. I wasn't even invited to the ceremony, but part of me wanted to see my family, sit quietly in the back. Then Dad called, a rare call. "Camille, about the wedding," he said. Hope flickered. Stupid, stubborn hope. "We think it's best if you don't attend," he continued, matter of fact. "You look unwell. You've lost weight. Your hair. It's Derek's special day. We don't want anything to overshadow it." I understood perfectly what he meant. Me being sick didn't belong in their perfect little celebration. I said nothing more. The wedding went on without me. I saw the photos on Facebook. Mom in champagne silk dabbing her eyes, Dad in his suit smiling, Derek and Megan glowing among 150 guests who had no idea I existed. The caption read, "The happiest day of our family's life." I screenshot it, added it to the folder, and didn't open Facebook again for 6 months. 3 weeks later, the medical bills began arriving. Insurance covered much, but not everything. Thank God for my company's insurance plan, but even with coverage, it wasn't enough. After deductibles, copays, and medications they didn't cover, my bills came to $47,000. $47,000 I didn't have. I sold my car, canceled every subscription, cut groceries to the bare minimum, and when that still wasn't enough, I did something I never thought I would. I asked my father for help. I texted, "Dad, I'm in trouble. The medical bills are more than I can handle. Could I borrow some money? I'll pay it back." I stared at the screen for 20 minutes before sending it, my finger hovering like it could set off an explosion. 2 hours later came his reply, "Your mother and I just finished paying for Derek's wedding. We don't have extra right now. Have you looked into a personal loan? Your credit should be good enough." I read it 3 times, hoping for some sign of care. A sorry, a wish we could help, and "I love you." But nothing. $47,000. That was the cost of staying alive. My family, who had just spent $80,000 on my brother's wedding, couldn't spare a dime. I screenshot the text and added it to my growing folder, then applied for a personal loan at 14% interest, knowing I'd be paying it off for years but at least surviving. The worst night came after round 4. My oncologist had warned me that each round hit harder than the last, but nothing could prepare me for lying on the bathroom floor at 2 a.m., shaking so violently my teeth chattered, my body rejecting everything inside it. That night I lost my hair, not slowly strand by strand but all at once. I woke to my pillow covered in the hair I'd had since birth, the hair Mom used to braid. I crawled to the toilet, vomiting until there was nothing left, then kept going. At 2:47 a.m. I called Mom. 8 rings and voicemail. I called again, voicemail. At 3:15 a.m. I texted Harper, "I think I need help." She arrived 40 minutes later, still in scrubs from a late shift, didn't say a word, just sat with me on the bathroom floor, held what was left of my hair and stayed until sunrise. Mom finally called at 10:23 a.m. "Sweetie, you called last night." I had my phone on silent. Megan and I were at the spa. Post-wedding stress relief. You know how it is. What did you need? I looked at Harper making tea in my tiny kitchen, then at the bald patches in the mirror. "Nothing, Mom," I said. "Oh good. Well, call anytime. Love you." And she hung up before I could respond. I screenshot that call too, and finally, painfully, I understood what family really meant. I know a lot of you watching have probably faced something similar. Being let down by the people who were supposed to love and support you when you needed them most. If that hits home, drop a "me too" in the comments. You're not alone. And if you're wondering what happened when my father finally needed me, stay with me. What comes next, I promise, is something you won't see coming. But first, let me explain how I survived. 2 years later, I was declared cancer-free. I still remember the day Dr. Patterson looked at me and said, "No evidence of disease. Camille, you did it." I walked out of her office and cried in the parking garage for an hour. Not sad tears, not even happy ones, just pure release. 2 years of holding my breath and finally exhaling. So much had changed in that time. I'd been promoted to art director. Turns out staring down your own mortality makes corporate life take you more seriously. My boss, Victor Reeves, had kept my position open during treatment, let me work remotely whenever I could, and never once made me feel like a burden. "Talent is worth waiting for," he said when I thanked him. I'd moved too, selling my small Somerville apartment and buying a condo in Beacon Hill with a view of the Charles River and space for my resilient Monstera. I even bought myself a navy cashmere scarf to celebrate my 1-year remission, the most expensive thing I'd owned that wasn't a medical bill. Harper and I stayed closer than ever, meeting for Thursday dinners that now felt more like sisterly time than just friendship. My family? I hadn't seen them in 2 years. Our exchanges were minimal. A Happy New Year text, a birthday emoji, nothing that really mattered. I'd made peace with that, or at least a fragile truce. I had a good life now, a life I'd built myself from the ground up. And then, out of nowhere, my father called. It was Thursday evening and I was making salmon with roasted vegetables because, during chemo, I'd learned to cook to control exactly what I ate. My phone lit up with a name I hadn't seen in years. Dad. I stared at it. The salmon sizzled in the pan. My first instinct was to let it go to voicemail, like I'd learned to let so many things go over the years. But something, curiosity or maybe that stubborn hope that still lived inside me, made me answer. "Hello, Camille." His voice was different. Thin, unsure, hesitant in a way I'd never heard from him before. Not a, "How are you?" or an apology for abandoning me during my cancer treatment. Just, "I need to see you." My chest tightened. "What's going on, Dad?" asked my voice small. There was a long pause, then I heard my mother's muffled voice in the background, asking something I couldn't make out. "I've been diagnosed with something," he finally said. Another pause. "Parkinson's disease. Early stage, they say," he added, trailing off. I stood frozen in the kitchen, phone pressed to my ear, ignoring the salmon burning on the stove. Then he said, "There's a dinner Sunday at the house, your mother, Derek and Megan. I want you there. We need to discuss the future." The future? After 2 years of building a life without them? Somehow I heard myself say, "I'll be there." When I hung up, it hit me. During the entire conversation, the first real one we'd had in 2 years, he hadn't asked if I was okay. He didn't even know if I'd survived. The next 2 days were a whirlwind of dread and dark curiosity. I researched Parkinson's disease as I do now. Early stage isn't a death sentence, but it's a slow decline. Tremors, stiffness, eventually difficulty walking, talking, swallowing. It demands patience, long-term care, and someone willing to put their life on hold. Suddenly it all made sense. He didn't call because he missed me or regretted abandoning me. He called because he needed something, and I was the logical choice. The daughter without a husband, without children, the one who had always been expected to sacrifice. That night I called Harper. "You're going?" she asked cautiously. "I need to know what they want, and I need them to look me in the eye when they ask for it. I'm not going to let them manipulate me anymore." I touched the navy cashmere scarf by my door, my reminder of everything I'd survived, and whispered, "But I need to face them. It's time." Harper was silent for a moment, then added carefully, "You know that folder you've been keeping, the screenshots, the visitor logs? Bring it. Just in case. It's your proof, your reminder of the truth if they try to rewrite it." I hadn't touched that folder in months, but that night I sat on my bed and scrolled through 2 years of evidence. The texts, the call logs, the hospital visitor records with my name at the top and empty columns where visitors should have been, a record of my family's absence. Sunday arrived too quickly. I dressed carefully, not to impress but like armor. Black slacks, a cream silk blouse, and the navy cashmere scarf draped over my shoulders. I looked successful, healthy, and like someone who had built a life without them. Harper texted me before I left. "Remember, you don't owe them anything. Not a single thing." The drive to Newton took 40 minutes, and when I arrived the house looked exactly as I remembered. A white colonial with black shutters, 3 stories, 5 bedrooms, and a lawn so perfect it seemed unreal. The place I grew up in but never truly belonged to, the house where love always came with conditions. I sat in the car for 5 minutes, watching the warm light spill from the dining room windows. Inside I could see movement. My mother likely arranging the table with the good china, Waterford crystal, sterling flatware, every prop of a picture-perfect family that had left me out. My phone buzzed again. Harper reminding me, "You survived cancer. You can survive dinner." He was right. I faced death. A family meal would be nothing compared to that. I grabbed my purse, making sure my phone with the folder was inside, and walked up the brick path to the front door. The doorbell timed its familiar 3 notes, carrying a lifetime of memories. My mother opened the door, her face an impossible mix of joy, relief, and maybe guilt. She pulled me into a hug before I could react, smelling of Chanel No. 5, the same scent she had worn to my high school graduation, to Derek's wedding, to all the milestones that didn't include me. "You look wonderful. Come in," she said. I stepped inside and braced myself. The dining room hadn't changed in 2 years, or maybe 20. The mahogany table that could seat 12 even when there were only 5, the crystal chandelier my grandmother supposedly brought from Ireland, the family photos on the wall, arranged chronologically, stopping abruptly around my 18th birthday, all a frozen reminder of the life I had been excluded from. I noticed it for the first time then. The photo timeline on the wall. There was Derek's college graduation, Derek's engagement party, Derek's wedding, moment after moment carefully preserved. My place in that story stopped at 18, frozen in an awkward prom dress, smiling at a camera that never really saw me. "Camille," Derek said as he stood up, the family favorite as always, opening his arms wide. Megan stayed seated behind him, one hand resting on her stomach, quietly reminding me that the next generation of favoritism had already begun. I returned his hug stiffly. He felt heavier, softer, like someone who had never needed to fight for space or approval. He told me I looked great, his eyes briefly flicking to my hair, now grown back, and at least he was kind enough not to comment. Then I looked at my father. He sat at the head of the table where he had always ruled from, but he looked smaller, somehow older. His left hand shook slightly against the tablecloth, a movement he tried and failed to control. When our eyes met, I saw something new there: fear. "Sit down, Camille," he said, his voice still firm but worn around the edges. "We have a lot to talk about." I took my seat, posture straight, my purse beside me, my phone inside it like a quiet witness. Dinner was served, the same familiar meal my mother made for every important occasion, and we ate mostly in silence, the clink of silverware filling the gaps. When the plates were cleared, my father stood with effort, gripping the table before steadying himself. He spoke directly, explaining his diagnosis and the need for long-term help, letting the weight of it settle over the room. Then he said they had discussed it as a family and decided someone should move back home to care for him. His gaze landed on me. "Camille, you're the obvious choice," he said, pointing out my remote work and my lack of a family of my own, even mentioning that my old room was ready. It wasn't a request, it was an expectation. Not an invitation but an order. Derek nodded without looking at me, and in that moment, I understood exactly why I had been called back. I looked around the table, taking it all in. My father's trembling hand, his expectant face, my mother's soft, insistent voice, Derek leaning back confidently, and Megan quietly watching. "You have a responsibility to this family, Camille," my mother said, that tone she always used when she wanted something without outright demanding it. Derek added, matter of fact, that with the baby coming, Megan would need his support. Not that he wanted to help, just that she needed him. A convenient excuse. Megan stayed silent, her hands on her belly, her eyes fixed on me, and I could see she understood, recognized the familiar pattern. I spoke quietly. "Think about what you're asking." My father's voice hardened. "We're not asking. We're telling you. You're the daughter. This is what daughters do." The words hung in the air, heavy and familiar, and I could feel the old pressure to comply rising. The instinct to make myself small so everyone else could be comfortable. But that Camille was gone. That Camille had died on a bathroom floor 2 years ago, alone with a phone full of unanswered messages and a family that never came. "Before I answer," I said, keeping my voice steady even as my chest pounded, "I want to ask you something, Dad." He blinked, surprised. People didn't usually question Richard Atwood. "When was the last time you asked how I was doing?" I continued, sharper now. "When was the last time you checked if I was even still alive?" Silence. My mother's smile froze. Derek stared at his water glass. Megan leaned back, distancing herself. "What are you talking about?" my father finally asked, but the edge in his voice had softened. "I'm asking a simple question. You say I have responsibilities to this family, but when I was really sick fighting for my life, where was this family?" I cut her off gently but firmly. "No, I need an answer," I said, keeping my voice steady, the way I'd learned to do over the last 2 years when everything inside me felt like it was breaking. "Dad, do you even know if I'm still in remission? Do you know what my last scan showed or anything about my health at all?" The silence this time felt sharper, heavier. I continued, looking straight at him. "You're sitting here looking healthy to me. Am I wrong?" His expression shifted from confusion to something darker. "What do you mean healthy?" he asked. "You said you had cancer." "I had stage 3 cancer," I replied calmly, letting the words sink in. "I went through 6 months of treatment. I lost my hair, lost weight, and paid $47,000 myself because you said you couldn't help." For the first time in my life, my father had no words. Slowly, deliberately, I reached into my purse, my hands steady. "I'm cancer-free now. 2 years in remission. But you didn't know that, did you? Because you never asked." I pulled out my phone as my mother started crying quietly. "You were too busy with the wedding," she whispered. I nodded. "Yes, Derek's wedding. The one you spent $80,000 on. Important enough to plan, but my illness wasn't important enough to visit even once." Derek shifted and muttered that he didn't realize how serious it was. "I told Dad the day I was diagnosed," I said, looking straight at him. "I was crying. And you told me you couldn't deal with it because of the wedding." When he tried to deny it, I unlocked my phone and placed it on the table. "I have the messages. I have the call logs. I have the hospital records." I scrolled until the page filled with dates. 36 hospital visits, I said quietly. And not one single visitor. The room fell into a suffocating silence. Megan's hand slipped from her belly as her gaze bounced from my phone to Derek, then to my parents, something unmistakably shifting in her expression. My mother reached for the phone, hesitated, then pulled back, already out of words. I slid it to the center of the table, the screen glowing under the chandelier, displaying the hospital visitor log I'd requested again and again over 2 years, each time hoping the next page would finally show a familiar name and each time finding nothing. "You can look," I said calmly. "I'm not hiding anything." My mother was the first to take it, her hands shaking as she scrolled through months of entries, dates stamped in cold institutional font, my name at the top, and that brutal column repeating the same word over and over. "None." "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why didn't you tell us how serious it was?" "I did," I replied, pulling up the screenshots. I showed her the texts with my chemo schedule, her replies about wedding flowers, the message where Dad told me to get a loan, the call log showing I'd called her 23 times in 6 months and she'd answered twice. Derek snatched the phone, his face draining to a sickly gray as Megan read over his shoulder, jaw clenched. "This can't be right," he muttered. "It is," I said evenly. "Every screenshot is time-stamped. Every record is official. This isn't my opinion. This is what happened." I looked at my father, frozen, his trembling hand pressed flat against the table. "I don't need apologies," I said quietly. "I just need you to remember this when you ask anything of me again." The silence afterward was deafening. My mother was crying openly now, mascara streaking her cheeks as she repeated, "I didn't know." I met her eyes. "You knew, Mom. You just chose not to see." Derek was still gripping my phone, scrolling through the screenshots like he was searching for something that might clear everyone's name, but there was nothing there to save them. My father finally spoke, his voice rough and unsteady, saying this was all in the past and what mattered now was the present because he was ill and needed help. He insisted we had to move on. I almost laughed at that word. "Move on," I repeated, stunned, as he brushed aside everything I'd gone through as if it were a small inconvenience. He said he needed a caregiver and reminded me that I was his daughter. Megan finally broke the silence, carefully asking if he had known about the hospital visits and the money I'd asked for, and my father said nothing. Derek answered instead, shocked, realizing his father had known all along. When my father tried to explain it away with excuses about timing and priorities, I stood up calmly, gathered myself and put my phone back in my purse. My mother begged me not to leave, calling us a family, and that word hung in the air. I told her without raising my voice that family means showing up, answering late-night calls, helping when someone is struggling and being present when it matters most. I reminded them that I faced months of treatment alone while they focused on celebrations and plans. When my father tried to interrupt, I stopped him and made it clear I would no longer be the person they ignored until they needed something. I told him he had a son he had always supported and asked why that son couldn't help now. Derek protested that he had obligations and I calmly replied that I had too, yet I managed alone. As I walked toward the door, my father begged me to stop, his voice breaking as he apologized and admitted he was afraid. But by then, everything that needed to be said had already been spoken. He begged me, saying he was afraid of what lay ahead and that he needed me because I was his daughter. And for a brief moment I felt that old familiar pull, the need to feel chosen, valued, and finally enough. It was the same feeling I'd carried since childhood, always trying to earn his approval, but that version of me no longer existed. I had faced serious illness on my own, rebuilt my life piece by piece, and learned that survival changes you. I told him calmly that I understood his fear, but that he needed to hear the truth. I reminded him that 2 years earlier, when I called him crying and scared, he told me he couldn't deal with it at that time. I repeated those same words back to him, not with anger but with clarity and peace. The reaction around the room was immediate: shock, disbelief, silence, but I didn't stay to absorb it. I walked out slowly, past the polished furniture, the framed photos where I never appeared, and the image of a perfect family that never included me when it mattered. Outside, the cool air felt freeing, like a weight lifting. My mother followed, pleading and saying they loved me, but I gently told her that love doesn't disappear when someone is struggling and family doesn't abandon you when you need them most. I said goodbye without drama, got into my car and drove away, seeing them one last time in the mirror as I left. The road ahead was quiet and open, and for the first time, I felt certain I was finally choosing myself. For the first time in 30 years I could breathe, I was free. A week later my mother called and I answered, not out of obligation but curiosity, maybe because old reflexes die slowly. Her voice sounded worn, thinner somehow, as she told me what was happening back home. My father's condition was deteriorating faster than expected, he needed daily care now, and Derek had been forced to take leave from work because there was no one else. Golden boy Derek, missing deadlines, jeopardizing promotions, finally paying a price he'd never imagined he'd owe. Megan was overwhelmed, they were fighting constantly, and in a quiet moment she had admitted she was starting to understand why I left. I listened, said I was sorry for the situation and meant it, not for the unfairness finally landing where it belonged, but for the weight of reality crashing down on all of them. When my mother asked if I would come back, I said no, gently and firmly, and hung up without shaking. 3 weeks later, a single text arrived, different from anything she'd ever sent. An apology without excuses, without blame shifting, without asking for forgiveness. She named her failures plainly. Asterisk, I should have protected you. I wasn't there. I'm sorry. Asterisk, I read it again and again, stunned by the clarity of it, then sat with it for 2 days, letting it settle. When I finally replied, I told her I heard her, but I wasn't ready to talk. Her response came instantly. Asterisk, that's okay. Whenever you're ready. Or never. Whatever you need. Asterisk, 4 words, so different from the ones that had once broken me. I showed the messages to Harper over dinner, admitted I felt something fragile and unfamiliar. Hope, edged with caution, and she squeezed my hand and said that was exactly how healing is supposed to feel. You don't owe her forgiveness, Cam, but you're allowed to accept an apology, Harper told me, and I smiled because she was right. I'm still learning. 2 weeks later, a handwritten letter arrived, the writing uneven and shaky, my name carefully spelled out as if each letter took effort, and I carried it in my purse for days before opening it. When I finally read it alone one quiet evening, my father admitted his failure plainly, not blaming pride or illness, but his own choices, saying he saw now what he had done, the daughter he lost and the woman she became without him, asking for nothing in return. I folded the letter, put it away, and didn't respond, but I didn't discard it either, because some things deserve space. When Harper read it later and asked how I felt, I realized I felt sad for what was lost but not guilty anymore, and that was new. I told her I'd spent years feeling responsible for other people's shortcomings, trying to earn love that was never freely given, and I finally understood that some people can't give what they don't have. I'm not rushing forgiveness, not forcing peace to make others comfortable, because healing on my terms matters more now than meeting anyone else's expectations. When Harper gently wondered what I would do if things got worse, I told her I would face it when the time came, but I would never destroy myself to save someone else again, because that boundary matters and I'm allowed to keep it. 6 months later, I was still healthy, and my doctor even used the word thriving, a word I never thought would apply to me, yet it slowly started to feel true. I earned another promotion, moved into an office with a view of the Boston skyline, and found real joy in mentoring younger designers, something I once had to figure out alone. My personal life grew too. I was dating James, a kind high school teacher who knew my past and showed up without trying to change me, while Harper and I kept our weekly dinners and built a chosen family that felt safe and real. My relationship with my parents stayed distant but calmer. My father accepted outside care and my brother helped out when he had to, and I made peace with that being all it would ever be. I hadn't seen them again, and I was okay with that because my life was full. And if you're hearing this and feeling abandoned, sick, or overlooked by the people who should care the most, please hear this clearly. It is not your fault. I believed for years that if I tried harder or became easier to love, things would change, but they didn't. Sometimes people simply won't show up no matter how much you need them, and learning that truth can be painful, but it can also set you free. This is not a measure of your value, it reflects their choices, not who you are. What matters is this. You have every right to set limits, to protect your peace, and to say no to people who only appear when they want something from you. You are allowed to choose the people who truly care about you and build a real family with them, even if you don't share the same last name. Healing doesn't follow anyone else's schedule, and forgiveness is not something you owe on demand. It happens or doesn't in your own time. When I repeated those 4 words to my father, they weren't meant to hurt him, they were simply the truth, reflected back so he could finally understand their weight. Telling the truth can be uncomfortable, but it can also be freeing. As I sit here now in my favorite cafe watching life move past the window, I feel present in my own life again, not stuck in pain or waiting for approval. I still keep the evidence of what I lived through, not out of bitterness, but as a reminder of how far I've come. Those 4 words changed everything, not because they were harsh but because they were honest. I've learned that family isn't defined by blood, it's defined by who shows up when it matters.